Well, pnawn da, everybody, and welcome to our conversation with our presiding officer, Llywydd. It's great to be with you all here this afternoon, and normally we would be in the melting pot, which would be the Royal Welsh Show. Obviously, we're each in our own homes here today, and it's a great pleasure to welcome Elin Jones, Llywydd, from her home in Aberaeron. Elin is a Ceredigion girl. She was born in Llanwnin in the same year as me, actually. She was the youngest mayor of Aberystwyth, and she's a group member of Cwlwm. And one thing that's very, very dear to Elin's heart is rural economic development. And she went on and lectured numerous people there before getting more involved in politics. She's very keen on rural leadership, and she was a founder of some courses there that are really, really important to each and every one of us going forward. In 2009, she was the Farmers Weekly award for champion in farming, and well done, Elin, for that. So that was very, very popular. She's one of the original intake of the Senedd members, and it's great to have you here with us this afternoon. So first of all, Llywydd, could you tell us a little bit of what your role involves on a day-to-day basis and how it works down in the Senedd? Diolch yn fawr. Over to our Llywydd.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the invitation to attend and take part in this event. And I know we're all missing the Royal Welsh, although I don't think I'm particularly missing the heat that would have been in the Royal Welsh this week. And the breeze in Aberaeron at the moment is quite nice, actually. So my prime job still is to represent the people of Ceredigion. So I am the member for Ceredigion, and that's the most important aspect of my work as an elected representative still. But on top of that, I was elected in May of this year, after the election, once again to be the Llywydd. I'm the third Llywydd of the Senedd. David Ellis-Thomas was Llywydd for 3 years. Rosemary Butler, not for 3 years, what am I saying? 3 terms. Rosemary Butler was Llywydd for 1 term, and now I'm a 2nd term at Llywydd. Basically, it's the equivalent of the Speaker of the House of Commons. It's the equivalent of a chair of a meeting. Not dissimilar to what you do in some of your meetings, John, as you chair your council and various other bodies within the NFU. So I chair, keep order of those Senedd meetings. I also am responsible for how the Senedd works in all its functions, in its scrutiny, in its committee work, in the various bits of work that is undertaken there. And I also chair what's called the Commission, which runs the Senedd. So all the staff that work there to support the members, and how all of that is undertaken and done well for the people of Wales, and to make sure that the people of Wales know what's going on in their own Senedd and feel that it's approachable and that they can involve themselves directly in their own democracy. So making sure that we have good public access to the work that we do and public knowledge of what we do, so that the members are accountable to the people of Wales. That's particularly important to me, and to every part of Wales as well. Really important for me that the Senedd is never only about Cardiff or Cardiff Bay or the M4 corridor even, that it's about all of Wales and everybody has an ownership of it.
I think that's a really important point there, Llywydd, because, you know, we do see a rural-urban divide being coming more to the fore, and it's a real worry that I have as president of our organisation. You know, we have some real challenges across Wales, you know, in terms of addressing the climate change emergency, in terms of making sure that everybody has an opportunity to have a good, well-paid job and opportunity. And I think very often it's important that we need to get that balance right. We've seen in the recent occasions, Llywydd, that we've got a less fractured opposition now, and we've had a number of votes that have been tied, you know. Can you explain to us how the presiding officer and deputy presiding officer have to vote in these occasions, and how do we ensure that we get a fair representation for all of Wales in matters which are of utmost importance going forward?
Well, it's a really interesting politically Senedd this time around because of the numbers involved, the maths of it. There are 30 members to the government party, to the Labour Party, and there are 30 members of all the other parties together. And therefore, there are opportunities then for the opposition to work together and at times and make it more difficult for the government party to get their either their legislation through in some time or any vote. So that calls into question then straight away the vote of the Llywydd and the deputy Llywydd, and that's quite clear in standing orders that the Llywydd or deputy do not usually vote unless there is a casting vote to be cast. Now, what's really important to understand here is that our standing orders as a Senedd say that if the Llywydd, if the presiding officer comes from an opposition party, as I do, then the deputy presiding officer automatically has to come from the government party, and therefore I'm Plaid Cymru. I would be whipped to vote with Plaid Cymru, and Davies, who's the deputy presiding officer, is Labour, and therefore would be whipped to vote with the Labour group. And therefore, the fact that neither of us vote means that we cancel each other out totally, and we have no, and that has no effect then on the vote result of any vote. So, for example, if we did vote, the result on any vote could be 30-30. Since we don't vote, the result would then be 29-29. So it has no effect on the vote itself. When it comes to casting a vote, it's not cast on the individual preference. If a vote is tied and the Llywydd has to cast a vote, then it's not, unfortunately, perhaps, cast on the basis of what the Llywydd's particular view on an issue would be, but it has to be cast in line with standing orders, which usually means that it's cast against any result. And we've had already a few of those instances in the first weeks of the new Senedd, where on the vote of the NVZs, then the deputy Llywydd, well, no, in fact, it didn't come to that in the end. Sorry, I'm misleading now. It could have come to a tied vote, but on that issue where the motion was to refer the NVZs for review to the committee, the government could see that the vote was going to be tight, and they did agree then to the review by a committee, which hopefully will be ongoing in the autumn. And therefore, when it is tied, and we did have one in the last week, then the vote is cast against. As it happens on NVZs, for example, you can imagine that NVZs was a big issue for me here in Ceredigion, and I expressed my view on NVZs quite clearly before the election, in that and before the vote in the Senedd, that I would be, against the proposal that the government had at the time with the regulations, and therefore I excused myself from sitting in the chair for that debate then, because I'd already made a very clear view on the NVZ policy, but it made no difference to any votes because, as I explained, it's a neutral effect because David Rees would be voting with Labour and I'd be voting with Plaid Cymru, and therefore there's no difference to the result of the vote from a 29-29 to a 30-30.
Thank you, Llywyd. You mentioned that it's going to a committee and for review. How binding is the recommendations? Are the recommendations from that review? Can you explain that to us?
Well, almost nothing is binding on government outside of legislation and any loss of a budget motion that they would have. It's all about political pressure then, of course. So what I'd say is that there was some political pressure on the Welsh Government to agree to the committee review. It knows that its NVZ's policy has been criticised widely by the farming unions and by members across the chamber, and even questioned by, if I remember correctly, by some Labour members. Even though they might have voted for it, they certainly had representations from their farmers in their constituencies about some of the practical problems that they would face as a result of the NVZ regulations. So the committee will now go off and do its work and review, some of those practical difficulties, and whether there is a way that these regulations could be either redone or amended in a way which would make them more sensible for everybody concerned. And it would bring back proposals. At that point, if the committee has agreed unanimously with the recommendations, including Labour members, then there's a strong case for the government to be reviewing this and itself. And although not binding, I think it would be very powerful statement by the government, by the committee, if it voted for changes and then the government did not implement those, when the government itself has said now, by allowing it to go to committee, that it is open for the discussion to happen. It's not resisted the discussion to happen. So hopefully, the committee will do its work. You as a farming union will be vocal in your representations to the committee as to how things need to change. And I know that you felt that government possibly hasn't heard your representations of the past few years. Well, at least this now will be in an open committee session where everything will be on the record and everybody will be able to see what the views are. And the political pressure of that kind is significant, especially in a Senedd that is as politically as marginal as this one is for the government in getting any of its business through.
Yeah, thank you, Llywyd. Obviously, it's a really, really important point to every member in Wales. This affects every farming business. We want legislation and regulation which is fit for purpose and is designed in Wales, by Wales, for Wales. Obviously, cut and paste is not what we're looking for in a modern democracy. This is subject to a judicial review. I think it's likely that it's going to be accepted for that. So this obviously has some time to run, but it's vitally important that we do find a solution. We are very, very keen to get to the same end destination. We take full responsibility for our share of the problem, but we want to have workable regulation that will help. And so I'm absolutely committed to that, and we all are as a team. So going forward, obviously we've seen some criticism in Westminster by the Speaker of announcements being made outside the chamber, and we've seen some of those also in Cardiff, and we've seen a direction of travel where there is possibly less transparency and less scrutiny. The committees took some time to get formed. I believe there was a eagerness to have less people on the committees and even less committees. How can we ensure that there's proper scrutiny and transparency going forward? Because, this is vitally important for the Senedd this term, I believe. We have an agriculture bill coming through, and that will set the direction of travel for rural Wales for a generation to come. So that needs proper scrutiny. It needs to be made in Wales, by Wales, for Wales. I am certainly not prepared to accept cut and paste on that absolutely vital bill. So when it goes to Westminster, we've watched the bill go through Westminster, subject to amendments, extensive consideration by committees, different stages in both houses. You know, how do we ensure that we have a similar level of scrutiny, or effective scrutiny at the very least, in Cardiff?
Well, one of the most important pieces of legislation for this next Senedd will be the Agriculture Bill, in my view. It's a defining piece of legislation, and it will set the cornerstone for agricultural and land use policy for the next 10 to 15 years, possibly. And therefore it's of equivalent importance to the CAP reform every 7 years in the EU context, that we need to get this right, because it will set the foundation for years to come, because primary legislation doesn't come around often, and therefore the opportunity of this agriculture bill needs to be taken. And the bill scrutiny process in the Senedd is laid out, and government will need to follow it, as will the committee. And it, of course, the consultation thus far has been on the agriculture policy leading up to the bill, has been by government, with the people of Wales, and you'll have a view on how much of that consultation has been listened to from your perspective, and how much is feeding through finally to the agriculture bill itself. So it'll be published at some point in the near future by the government, and then it goes to the Senedd, to the committee that you've just described, as the Economic and Rural Affairs Committee, and it will be subject to a piece of work initially by that committee to look at the policy itself, and a big public consultation on the policy itself of that bill, and how the bill has been designed and explained and financed by the government. And then it'll go through an even more formal process of amendments, and there'll be 2 stages to this. Stage 2 and Stage 3. Stage 2 will be in the committee, where amendments can be laid on any aspect of the bill, and then votes on those amendments to see if they can pass or not. And then the same process happens in the full Senedd. So it's quite a lengthy, intense period of scrutiny and amendment, and then there's a final vote. It's called a Stage 4 vote on the bill in its entirety. And now, the interesting part again that we go back to on the numbers here is that the numbers are tight for government. They don't have a majority to pass a piece of legislation without the support of 1 or 2 other parties, and therefore they will find that they will need to, as well as consult and negotiate with the public and with the unions, they will need to think about how they listen to any amendments and agree to any amendments that come from opposition parties, in order to get the bill through finally. Because if they want the support of an opposition party, they are going to have to possibly agree to some amendments that would be important for the opposition parties. If we think about the agriculture bill, for example, I know of, already a clear piece of difference of opinion between some of the opposition parties, my own Plaid Cymru, and the government, on whether there should be a basic or sustainability payment, stability payment, even within the agricultural payment regime for the future, or whether it should all be based on an agri-environmental kind of payment. That's an area that will need to be thoroughly scrutinised and possibly form parts of amendments during this stage. So it's it's going to be a pretty interesting piece of legislation to take through the various routes of the Senedd. But the guarantee there is that there are lots of checks and balances in there, and lots of opportunities for what the government puts down in its first phase, in its first draft, to be amended as it goes through the various scrutiny stages of the Senedd. So lots to play for.
Thank you, Llywydd, and thank you for being so clear on that. And we'll be very keen on the scrutiny and transparency, and we'll be keen to engage. Andrew R.T. Davies has described the Senedd as stale and subdued. What do you make of his comments, and do we need to invigorate the Welsh Parliament for this term?
Well, I always answer back to those members who say that by saying it's up to the members themselves to be interesting and exciting for the people of Wales to take notice of. So I always push back slightly on the members who say that. I think that we're in a particular situation at the moment where it's quite challenging for some members who like the vitality of the debate, the cut and thrust of the political debate. Not all members, thrive on that, but some do. And Andrew R.T. Davies is most definitely one. But we're still in a situation of a virtual hybrid Senedd where we can only accommodate 20 of the members in the Senedd and 40 are on Zoom because of 2-metre social distancing. Now that may change with regulations over the summer, but up until the last meeting last week, we were still only 20 members in the Senedd at any point in time, and that does curtail the way that we're able to discuss points across the chamber, cut across other members speaking, because as you will know from Zoom meetings, that's not as doable as it is when everybody's in the same room. So I know that there are members who are frustrated by that, and I am as well. There is nothing like chairing a session where there is a bit of, as long as it's in order, but there's plenty of discussion and debate and disagreement within the chamber, and that that it can be quite challenging for politicians to be involved in that, and politicians do need to be challenged across the political divide as well. So I understand why Andrew R.T. Davies is making that comment. I think it's primarily in the context of the virtual hybrid sessions that we hold at the moment, and we will see how and if everything changes once we go back into full sessions. What struck me as particularly positive is that there are a lot of great new members, it seems, in the Senedd this time, from all of the political parties actually, and it'll be great to see them get an opportunity in a full Senedd meeting to take part and provide a bit of challenge to the more senior members or older members who've been around for a while. So maybe I'm sure Andrew R.T. Davies would be able to cope with it all, but there's always a lesson in be careful what you wish for.
I think it's really important that we can get back to face-to-face meetings as soon as possible. Obviously, it's a new Senedd. We need to do that within the confines and restrictions of COVID, but it has been difficult to engage. We've had limited engagement with members that have new responsibilities, and if they're to achieve their ambitions, they do need to engage. They do need to come out on farm and have a good look round. So we really do look forward to coming and getting back to normal in that way. It was great to have our first on-farm meeting down in Monmouth just a couple of weeks ago, and as you say, that cut and thrust and the challenge and the buzz that you get from that is great. We've got a question here, Llywydd, from Councillor William Power. Thanks for the discussion on key concerns that we share arising out of the question around Senedd scrutiny. A question for you, Llywydd. With the loss of representation of 4 MEPs as a consequence of Brexit and the potential loss of 8 Welsh MPs as a decision of the UK government, how important do you view progressing on reform of the Senedd in line with Professor Laura McAllister's report in your 5th Senedd? And what do you wish your legacy to be in this respect?
I'm just starting my job in this 6th Senedd, Bill, so I'm not thinking about my legacy at the moment. Anyway, it's great to have a question from William Powell. I hope you're doing well in this Heating Powys bill, and that's a really important question. We've seen accountability at a European level now no longer necessary. We may well face reduction in the number of MPs representing Wales in Westminster as a result of some UK government changes on the near horizon. But irrespective of those two changes, the case for increasing the number of members, the capacity of the Senedd, is made by its own situation, and we've referred to some of them already. John, you referred to the fact that we have, we had to think really carefully about how we design our committees this time because of a lack of members from the opposition parties and the backbench Labour members to fully sit on the number of committees that we probably would have wished to have had. But of course, members can't sit on more than 2 or 3 committees at a time because, just physically not possible to do that. Many Labour members and some other members already definitely sit on 2 committees, and some may have to sit on 3. So there is a real capacity issue on the side of the opposition and backbench in particular in being able to properly scrutinise. So there have been the Laura McAllister report that Bill referred to, other independent assessments as well of the fact that the Senedd was always created as too small a body to do the full work of any Senedd, and by any comparison with any legislative parliament elsewhere in Europe or in the Western democracies, then we're very, very small as a parliament, and we do need to grasp the issue of increasing the number of members. As it happens, an interesting fact, because obviously people will be concerned about the cost of this, but when compared to the cost of 4 MEPs, then the cost of 4 MEPs to the public purse was costed by the UK Treasury as being greater than the cost of 20 Senedd members. So if you think about the economics of that, by now not having to pay for 4 MEPs, we can, in some form, afford to the public purse 20 further Senedd members. So we have to grasp the nettle on this. I'm keen to pursue it. I know that there is interest across the political parties. It does require a 2/3 majority of the Senedd to vote on any change of this nature. But in doing so, we would need to be clear to everybody why we're doing it, not just to have more politicians, but to make sure that we have better representation that fully reflects the way people have voted in Wales, and that that means that there is also then better scrutiny of government. Point that John's made several times is that there's better scrutiny of government and better scrutiny of budgets in the Senedd, so that everybody will benefit from that in the longer term. Great question.
How do we ensure that the Senedd is inclusive and that we do get more people voting in future elections? Just prior to this election, you were with Hayley Pearce and her Virgin Voter programme. She actually visited Sioned here in Pentre as well, and it was really transparent then about the lack of engagement, not just in parts of rural Wales, but urban Wales as well, amongst young people. How do we make them feel more part of our democracy? Because I believe going forward, this is absolutely vital. We cannot continue to have government at such low levels of support, and it's a challenge whether it's Cardiff or Westminster. So how do we properly ensure that this is properly the voice for the whole of Wales, Llywydd?
Yeah, that's a really important point, and I think in general, rural constituencies tend to have a higher turnout than more urban constituencies in Welsh elections and UK elections. So it's more of an issue in urban areas, but it's equally important. You know, we don't have enough people choosing to exercise their vote. I think that one issue is that sometimes people feel that their vote will make no difference in some constituencies because they feel that, you know, it's always been a Labour member here or it's always been a Plaid member here, and there's no point me voting because I'm not going to vote for them, so it won't count. So having a better electoral system, which means that every vote has more of a meaning to it, and you know, there are different electoral systems that we may well want to develop in Wales, and such a one is a single transferable vote. It's very technical, sorry, at this point, but it does give people more chance of having their vote actually mean something in the number of people who are elected in the same way as they voted. So that's one possibility. But more importantly than that is the role that all of us as politicians and those of you that work around political systems have in just engaging people to make sure that they're aware of the decisions that are happening in their name. And we've had, you know, a great opportunity to do this through the pandemic, which, you know, is a strange result of the pandemic, is that more people have become aware of devolution and devolved powers happening in Wales than were aware previously of where the powers lay, and therefore they're able to think more about, well, if I like what Mark Drakeford is doing, I'll vote that way, and if I don't, I'll vote the other way. So at least there's a bit more information out there. Getting information to people is more challenging though, because on the whole, the Senedd is not covered widely in the UK-based media, and the UK-based media is what people tend to read and watch, and therefore using social media more creatively as Senedd members means that we're able to hopefully get information and a bit of excitement and interest generated to people more widely. It's, you know, there's a decline in numbers of people engaged in the democratic process right throughout the world, but there's a danger also in people not being engaged in the democratic process, and therefore, you know, we need to redouble our efforts, whether it's happening in the rest of the world or not. We need to do better in Wales.
Yeah, fully agree with you there, Llywydd. There's a question here now from Abby Kate, Farmer's Guardian, and this is something, a subject that's very close to my heart because it's incredibly important for the UK, but it's even more important for Wales. And that's what role would you like to see the Senedd playing in negotiating and scrutinising future trade deals and FTAs? You know, we have a situation in Canada where Quebec have a veto. It was something that I was keen on during my term in the Trade and Agriculture Commission. Obviously, others were less so. I think it's incredibly important, though, that if we are to have proper free trade agreements going forward that benefit our countries, it's absolutely crucial we get this right. So I'd like to know what's your view on this, Llywydd?
Well, my view on this is that governments, in their discussion on trade agreements, should work collaboratively. So I would want the four governments of the UK to be working collaboratively on agreeing those trade agreements. And my message there is primarily to the UK government to make sure that they are discussing trade agreements openly with Welsh, Scottish and Northern Irish governments, and in particular on agriculture and food. We know that there may well be different interests and issues that are more important in different countries within the UK, and therefore making sure that there is proper discussion and agreement on those trade negotiations and trade agreements is is an important principle. I'm not sure whether that open discussion is happening at this point, and I'd urge everybody to improve discussions on that. Then on the more constitutional question of where the scrutiny of those agreements should lie, then certainly, you know, full scrutiny should be applicable to all of the UK parliaments. And then, you know, I'd personally like to be in a situation where if at the end there was a veto from various parliaments and our governments, then that would be a way of resolving any issues. It doesn't look as if that will be the case in the short term, but that's not to stop any of us, because we're in this new situation now for the long term, and trade agreements can be set, but they will need to be reset. So what is the reality of today may not have to be the constitutional reality of 10 years' time or 15 years' time. So as a basic principle, my view is that that all governments and all parliaments should have an equal role in these most important of trade agreements across the world.
Thank you, Llywydd. I think there have been numerous discussions with Westminster. Whether there's been much influence would be, let's wait and see on that respect. I think, Llywydd, the one thing we do have the ability to do here in Wales is effectively market what we produce. The SPV programme, Sustainable Brand Values, has been shelved effectively. You know, I think we have a need to have a clear vision and ambition. Some of the image, the Origin Green work that's been undertaken by Elin that have a similar grass growing natural production capability to ourselves is really effective. You know, what do you see about that ambition, and how do you see that ambition for Wales developing going forward? And are you comfortable that the Senedd has a firm grasp on that and that is properly prioritised? Because when you consider the likes of Australia, the number of trade councillors they have across the world, the effectiveness of their negotiating team is really something to see. So I think, you know, if we are to survive in this brave new world, we really do need to have the best people producing the best food in the world and promoting the best practice in the world. So, you know, how do you see the role for the Senedd and Welsh Government in that?
Well, certainly I agree with you that that we need to reinvigorate efforts now, because we have new challenges to face in how we place Wales and Welsh products and produce on the international and UK market for that reason. So I would hope that Welsh Government looks at this, but more importantly that possibly our committees will want to look at this as well. You know, we know that our brand, the brand of Wales, is one that has a very positive connection with being environmentally friendly and good in terms of welfare. So it's a strong brand, Wales, both within Wales and outside of Wales. It's not shouted loudly enough. There's probably not enough resource behind the brand, and we probably need to think again as to how we bring that brand together across all produce and across, you know, the brand of Wales itself. And with brands, as we know, whether they're in the commercial world or the public world such as this, then they continually need to be redesigned and refocused as circumstances change. And I would hope that in the context of our time post-Brexit, new agriculture setup, that we look once again to see how we can properly take advantage of the fact that we produce great quality food and drink in Wales, and we make sure that more and more people know about that.
Thank you, and that we welcome those comments, because obviously if we get this policy right, if we get our agriculture bill right, if we get sustainable farming on our land meshed in and linked with sustainable brand values, we will have a able to prove and validate that those 18,000 farmers across Wales are doing what they say. They have that excellent produce, and here's the proof behind it, whether it's environmental, antibiotics or whatever, that we have that ability to prove and validate. The last question out of it, because I know you have to be on the road very shortly. As we've mentioned earlier, you are one of the class of 99. That is to say, one of the MSs have been there from the outset. During the time, you've held a wide range of roles: backbencher, opposition spokesman, minister, and now presiding officer. Could you give your reflections on how you see the Senate develop over that time as an MS from a rural constituency, and obviously having that passion for rural areas yourself, having held the portfolio of Rural Affairs Minister? Do you feel the voice of rural Wales is now weaker or stronger?
Well, that's a big question to end with. The last 20 years have seen huge changes in the Senedd in terms of the powers the Senedd has. It now has an ability to vary taxes and to create legislation in a way that in the first few months and years of the Assembly back from 1999, we could basically only talk about stuff and we weren't able to influence and do stuff as we can these days. In terms of the various roles I've played, and I've played them all really, Minister, Llywydd, backbench health spokesperson, backbench economy spokesperson, there is no role where you can actually affect people's lives and make the changes in the way that a minister can. So being in government, and I would have liked Plaid Cymru obviously to have been in government after May of this year, but it wasn't to be. But that is the way that you can influence the majority of change, as I tried to do in my time as minister. It was too short a period for me to accomplish everything I wanted to accomplish, but it is the time when you can accomplish some changes. I always, in my politics, try and not overemphasize the rural versus urban issue, because I don't want to create division. I see more in common with many issues that some of our peripheral valleys communities face in peripheral rural areas, facing lack of services, lack of job opportunities, poor wages. So there's lots of common ground between many of our more urban areas, non-city possibly, but urban valleys areas and our rural areas. Sometimes I hear members say, oh, there's too much discussion here on rural issues and agricultural issues in the Senedd. And then I hear they say, oh, there's not enough discussion on rural and agricultural issues. And somewhere in the middle, we strike the reasonable balance, I think. But we have to make sure that when there are important issues that are primarily of concern to rural communities, NVZs was one, the agricultural bill will be a huge other one, that we try and work across parties to make those members who don't come from a rural constituency understand that having a kind of very general policy on something, can have a big backlash and effect on rural communities, and they need to understand the detail of that. And it's a responsibility on all of us as rural members, irrespective of political parties, to try and make members who don't represent farming communities understand the real challenges in the detail that a particular policy or piece of legislation entails. Hopefully, with a Senedd where, as we've discussed earlier, the balance of power is across the Senedd. Actually, every part of the Senedd has a degree of power in this. The government party itself, but the opposition parties and the individual member as well, all have a degree of influence and power that they can wield on different issues. And hopefully that will make for a better cooperative approach to policy making, legislation and budget setting than perhaps we've seen in the last few Senedd. So I'm hopeful that all concerned will want to make this Senedd one that is more creative, more proactive in how we do our work. We're not, as the last Senedd was, bogged down to a certain extent by Brexit and then by the pandemic, and perhaps weren't able to be as free and creative and as we could have been. So there's an opportunity to do things different and better in this Senedd, and I hope that all members will grasp it. And I'm absolutely, definitely sure that the NFU will make sure that we do our job as well as we should in listening to you and other representations from rural areas.
Thank you, Llywydd. Thank you for your time today. I fully concur with you. We are one Wales. We're not a big country, but we're a pretty special country, and there is no room for division. And that's incredibly important, that leaders from the First Minister down are incredibly careful with their language going forward, because it's easier to divide than unite. And, you know, we have some very serious responsibilities. We are making policy here for the first time in my lifetime. Let's make sure it's right. Let's make sure it's effective, and let's make sure we have a stronger Wales when we come out the other side of it. So thank you very much for your time today, Llywydd. Diolch yn fawr, safe journey, and thank you for joining us in our Royal Welsh session today, and we look forward to having a proper Royal Welsh next year. Diolch yn fawr.
Definitely. Diolch yn fawr.